Welcome back again, everyone. I'm Lynn Doyle, and this is It's Your Call. We're joined today by nationally known and best-selling author Jim Miller, whose latest book features an inside look at the culture at ESPN. It's called Those Guys Have All the Fun Inside the World of ESPN. Now, when it says those guys have all the fun, wasn't necessarily a lot of fun for the ladies throughout the history of ESPN, was it?
No, I think the truth is that during the 1980s, ESPN was a work in progress, and it was growing incredibly fast. And I think that for at least some of the time, there wasn't even a formal HR department. So it was an environment heavily dominated by men, and there were a lot of guys right out of college who had never worked in businesses or networks before. And I think that the rules were absent for quite a time, and it was a very difficult time to be a woman working there. And I was particularly pleased that a lot of women spoke on the record about their experiences, particularly Carrie Ross, who was an anchor there, because it was difficult. And
share that story for people and give them a little taste of what they'll find if they get this book. Carrie Ross, take us back to that.
Well, Carrie Ross was, very capable, beautiful anchor. Her first day, she's sitting there working away, and the guys come in from a softball game and they throw on the Playboy channel right next to her and let that run while she's trying to do her work. I think that what she wound up doing was she stood up in a company-wide meeting in the cafeteria, and this is when the company wasn't that big, so you could do that, and basically said enough. And it was a very important moment in the history of ESPN, because I think from that point on, management understood the problems in a fundamentally different way, and they started a process that, to solve some of these problems. It's not that everything got better after that, but it certainly got on the road to at least addressing some of these problems.
She actually put it on the radar screen. It was a defining moment for ESPN, but also in her career too. She didn't stay at ESPN for the rest of her career.
No, she didn't wind up staying there, and I think that, look, I mean, she went on to great things, and she's a wonderful person. I really enjoyed getting to know her through the interviews. But I do think that every once in a while, ESPN, they'll take a couple steps forward, and then something will happen, and and there's a step backward. But I do believe at this point in the company's history, they're committed to a good workplace for everybody.
Let's talk about some of the female sports anchors that succeeded at ESPN and some of the things that they had to deal with, because I obviously started my career in sports, so I was fascinated when I was reading the interviews. And I should point out that the style of this book is really quite different from perhaps what you're used to, because it is in the voice of the interviewees.
Right, it's an oral history.
Right, it's not Jim just writing what he thinks. He's actually quoting what they told you. Gail Gardner, I worked with her in Baltimore briefly, and she is the one that I remember as kind of like the one who forged the way for a lot of female sportscasters.
Gail Gardner was probably the first female to do a nightly sportscast. It really wasn't on the radar, and she did a great job with it. She was at ESPN and was sent to Australia for the America's Cup, and was there for quite some time, and then before going to NBC. But she was a true pioneer.
Where is she now?
She's retired. I think she may be in New Jersey, actually. I think last time I talked to her, I seem to remember a New Jersey area code. But she had, lots of fun memories.
And what about Robin Roberts?
Well, Robin, John Walsh at ESPN and Al Jaffe, they saw in Robin something that was very special, and she was able to work with, as I mentioned, Charlie Steiner and Bob Lee, and now is at Good Morning America. I mean, she's a huge star, and I think that she would tell you that a lot of what she came to, a lot of what she does now, she learned at ESPN.
Any other female sportscasters that come to mind that really had to overcome a lot of sexual harassment to get to where they are today?
Well, I don't know whether she had to overcome a lot of harassment or not, but Andrea Kramer for many years was one of the best, in fact, probably the best reporter at ESPN. She's tenacious. She will track down anything. She has amazing sources. The coaches, the players have a very comfortable time talking to her, and she was there for quite some time and did an amazing job.
And what about the so-called sideline reporter? That was something that we've seen evolve, and now almost every game, every sportscast has that, and it always seemed to be a certain type of sideline reporter.
Yes, I think that it isn't radio, it's television, so I think that a lot of people, want a certain kind of look on the sidelines. But the interesting thing that's happened with sideline reporting now is it's been vastly diminished.
Right.
Because, like on Monday Night Football, for instance, Michelle Tafoya took off and went to NBC because, I think in part because there really wasn't enough to do at ESPN. The booth is very crowded, and there's a lot to talk about in the booth. And so people have I guess they have less of a need or less a desire to hear from the sidelines. One
of the big sideline incidents that was scandalous at the time was Susie Colbert and Joe Namath.
Yes.
How do you feel that whole situation was handled?
I thought Susie did a great job with it, and my favorite quote in the book about that whole thing was Susie's mom, who called her afterwards and said, "I'm glad to see that Joe still has good taste in women." So, I think she, look, that's a very hard thing to go through on live national television.
Absolutely. Well, she's another one that certainly has evolved since the early days, particularly of ESPN2. She's evolved to now being able to stand in her own stature and is respected for everything that she's been able to accomplish.
People, it's funny. People back then considered ESPN2 a failure because it got off to a rocky start. Keith was unhappy, but it turns out that ESPN was this great cradle for ESPN2 was a great cradle for talent. Kenny Mayne, Susie Colbert, Stuart Scott, a lot of people who started at ESPN2 wound up gravitating over to the mothership and have great careers.
All roads lead back to Keith Olbermann. It's funny because in the book you talk about how unhappy he was in this so-called experiment of ESPN2, and he was not shy about letting people know how he felt.
Yes, I think the key to understanding Keith is that there are no unspoken thoughts. I mean, fortunately, though, he's incredibly articulate about what he feels and what he says. And I think that, his whole thing, people misunderstand him sometimes because, yes, he does stand up to management, but his whole thing is he wants to make it better. And I think that's a lot of what he tried to do at ESPN.
Do you think the environment, the culture there in 2011, 2012 is at its best, or are there still cracks in the ESPN armor?
Well, I think that's an interesting time for ESPN right now because there's competition in the sense they haven't had competition in a long time, and we as viewers haven't had the feeling of competition in a while. Yes, CBS and Fox does football, and there's other competing, and Turner does baseball and basketball and everything else. But this whole realignment of Versus and Comcast and NBC, I think is something that's being taken notice there. And also the MLB network is doing an incredible job with baseball. And I think that the culture at ESPN understands that. So in many ways, I think they've gotten they're on the edge of their seat a little bit in the way that they haven't been in years before.
Of course, the content that it provides now is so incredibly different than in those early years. I mean, I think I remember watching, gosh, some of the most bizarre sports that you've ever seen, like
hurling, Australia rules
lumberjacking,
football. Yeah, and Denise Austin.
Oh yeah, she was great though.
Denise Austin.
She's still around.
She's still around. I'm sure she still has a flat stomach, but she
will challenge you to punch her right in the belly.
Right. And a lot of people talked about that in the book.
I read that. I was going to say, I know I got that fact somewhere. I have to take a quick break, Jim. We will be right back, and when we come back, we will talk not only more about this book, but about what else Jim has been working on and how it was that he came to talk to these 500 individuals about the inside world of ESPN. Stay with us. It's Your Call continues right after this.